Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Synthesized Sunsets, podcast where we talk about speculative fiction and the future of popular culture. I'm here with my new co-host, Gordon, and today we're going to be talking to Merrick, who is studying machine learning at Johns Hopkins and is also pretty into music and linguistics and popular media generally. So the theme that we're going to be talking about today is disintegration, which is the theme of this season's issue, and also the disintegration of the popular media landscape. So, Merrick, do you have any thoughts on how media has transformed over the past 10 years as a result of the media landscape becoming more atomized?
The most immediate thought is the shortening of content. We've all seen lots of things about short form content changing how we engage with media, and I definitely think that is true in terms of like how long we are willing to spend our attention on something, but also how we discover new things to consume as well.
I think that the role of the critic has definitely changed since media was more of like a monoculture, because in the past you had critics just kind of being the arbiters of what is good and what is worth consuming in major media outlets. But now critics have shifted towards more of a creator role where you actually have people doing creative stuff like video essays. But the main thing that you're getting out of these is their taste, and their ability to critique and synthesize different existing forms of media. So do you think that this type of critic plays kind of like a similarly important role to the critics of old, or do you think that the role of the critic is just kind of very much diminished in general?
Yeah, so one, I think it's become its own thing to consume instead of a way or a jumping off platform to find new media or decide what media to consume. And second, it's no longer about like the specific type of media that it is, but it's more, as you mentioned, the person who is describing the media. It's not tied to any specific specialization in like movies or literature for the review, but it's more tied to the taste of the individual who's giving the review.
Yeah, and something I feel like that goes along with this is, and with just the atomization of media in general, is I think less often like a video essay on YouTube is less going to be just like taking all movies and providing critiques to everything, which like was kind of the role of movie reviewers and newspapers in the past, but instead is going to be like, taking from their taste or kind of like what's targeted towards them and their audience and looking at those things. Media in general is targeted towards these like smaller sects of the population, and yeah, that goes for both the consumers, but also the critics as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also changed how we consume media. Like, I've definitely watched video essays and critiques on media that I never like contemplated viewing, but because like I was familiar with the creator or slash critic already, I was like more inclined to watch a video essay about this thing that I was never intending to watch in the first place. And so it was more interesting to me to hear the opinion of this person of this thing that I like would not watch on my own than it was for me to like actually just go watch the thing itself. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's like an uncommon experience. I think that's like pretty common even. So we've kind of shifted to consuming media by proxy instead of consuming it directly in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is this interesting dynamic since the fall of the conventional critic, where in some ways people have become less widely read because they're more specialized, but in other ways people have become more widely read. I think it's pretty common for someone to be a lot more familiar with their specific niche of media that they're interested in compared to, like a Star Wars enthusiast of now, for example, compared to like a Star Wars enthusiast of the past. It's just a totally different way of engaging with the media. But then I think that you also have more people engaging with things that maybe aren't conventional books or conventional movies, because it's just easier to highlight something like experimental art in the form of a video essay. But I do think that there is something that's lost when people are less widely read. So when do you think this becomes a problem? Like, what would be, do you think there's ever a point where people would just become like way too narrowly read to just produce things that are comprehensible or artistically valuable outside of their niche? Or like, do you think that there is kind of a, just like a healthy breadth at which things would naturally settle?
I think to some extent there are people that exist now that are not widely enough read to produce comprehensible things. I just don't think they're producing things that are popular enough. But like, I'm sure you can find like fan fictions for, whatever your niche might be, and find something that is just like, so wrapped within the subculture that it's incomprehensible to a normie or whatever. I don't think it's really going to get to the point where those people are producing the majority of media. But I guess it is moving that direction.
I think it would be interesting to get to a state where you actually kind of had to become a pop culture specialist to like, get into a certain thing. Like there's just so much lore you have to consume around some kind of subculture for you to understand anything that's being produced at the like in the most popular parts of the subculture. I kind of think of like mathematical research, like to kind of understand the most popular mathematical papers that are currently being produced. You really kind of need to specialize in some particular branch about mathematics and just like study it for years and years to really get what they're saying. And it would be kind of interesting if it was like that for media too.
There's this story about Alchemist Guild where there's a bunch of these alchemists that are trying to find the Philosopher's Stone or whatever. And over time they start, getting close to discovering it, but they're running into an issue where, the goal is like out of reach of what is their lifespan. Maybe the background material to make new progress in research takes 80 years to learn. And maybe you can teach, like, get better teachers and stuff to over time become better at this. But I do sort of feel that this is something that's happening today in the world of research, especially, I don't know if this is just my bias sort of more having knowledge of it, but within math and physics, it feels like it really does take quite a long time to reach the actual point at which you can push human knowledge forward. And even then, you're doing something very precise. When talking about someone doing their math PhD thesis or something, even as someone who I think I understand math like pretty well in comparison to an average person, it's going to be pretty much guaranteed to be indecipherable. Do you all feel like this is something that's happening? Do you think it's a problem? Is it overcomable?
This is the Scott Alexander story, right? That you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, I remember that story. One thing that it kind of reminds me of is how, I believe it was Einstein or some famous scientist said something like, if you don't make a great discovery by the time that you're this certain age, then you probably never will make one. Maybe the boundary that's more salient than the end of your life is just the point at which you reach peak cognitive abilities. Maybe it's the case where people finally learn enough to do physics, but they don't have the brain power that they once did.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And I think there is kind of a saying where every physicist has their like most prominent breakthrough or something before they're 30, at least most of the famous people. And that's like really quite early at this point. Like a lot of people aren't getting their PhD until after they're 30. Unlikely to have too many great breakthroughs before then. Someone like Einstein or Euler, someone who can have that dramatic impact on a field, or at least in math and physics, it feels like they just can't really exist anymore.
There's so much math that all of the new stuff you have to like know quite a bit of math to get to. That being said, to your point about like reading somebody's math PhD thesis, although it would be indecipherable, I do think that is like an issue of like math people generally, not even just math people, but like people who are like very deep in their subjects just being like bad at explaining it to a lay person. And I think that is a skill that is often taken for granted or overlooked.
There was this experimental math thesis that had a focus on communicating in common parlance. So there was just like slang and swearing. I forget what this paper was called exactly. I definitely got a lot further through it than most math papers, but Definitely still after like the first 10 pages or whatever, I'm like, okay, I'm cooked now. Like it got me like further of the way there. But I think this is actually part of what like part of the central theme of that Scott Alexander story, which is that one of the main ways that alchemists can hack their way to a better understanding of alchemy is by getting better at compiling instructions for like the next generation of alchemists to learn off of. And so I think that definitely comes into play as well, but it doesn't really stave off the ultimate problem of the bound of increasing knowledge.
I do see what you're saying. At the same time, I don't think that it's like necessary to understand everything there is to a field in order to like make meaningful contribution to it.
Right, but like there is sort of like a minimum amount of breadth. There's probably some discoveries you could make that would require some like really good parallel understanding of like math and biology, right?
Yeah.
And like it might be the case that it becomes less and less possible to make those sorts of connections.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. Like I will never dispute that like having more knowledge and deeper knowledge about a thing will like make you better at doing things for that thing.
Mhm. But like, do you think there's some kind of like minimum breadth of knowledge that's necessary to make a meaningful contribution to a field, or just like not really?
Um, I don't. I think there is, but that the foundation of whatever you're learning does not necessarily need to start at zero. Like maybe I'm exposing myself here, but like I did not take a real analysis class until grad school, and I felt like that was fine. Like I was able to do measure theory, I was able to do probability, I was able to do statistics without having taken like real analysis, and like still use the structures that are implicit from like having the real numbers exist and use limits and whatnot. But that it was like not necessary for me to understand that. So I think that if you refine some subject matter into a thing that is like useful for specific applications, that it's not necessary to like go from zero. Like you are able to start at a different baseline and still be able to do things that are useful.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one area that Scott Alexander didn't quite get to in the Alchemist story is the idea that you could personalize these instructions. You know, like not only can you write better instructions generally, but you could also write instructions that are just very, very good for a specific next alchemist and the knowledge that they already have, and just being able to scaffold off of that. Um, which makes me think of another work, which is The Diamond Age by Neal Stephenson. In The Diamond Age, there is this product called the Illustrated Primer, which is this sort of like dream educational software. I don't know if it's accurate to call it software, but it's basically this educational tool where the main character is able to use it to understand the world and basically understand anything. And the tool has a way of knowing like exactly what she is going to be able to grasp, like what is kind of just beyond the frontier of her current knowledge. And as a result, she never fails to understand anything that it tells her, because it always knows exactly how much she is able to understand and like how to make it fun and engaging. And so she's just like consistently, efficiently being able to like traverse through this like sea of knowledge and, reach world domination or whatever. So I think that, even beyond making better instructions, there's also a sense in which better understanding the mind of someone who might come into these studies, like a specific person, could also help you along that path.
I've only read maybe about a third of it, but that's not going to prevent me from saying my opinion on it. So I mean, Neal Stephenson,
like I've read The Diamond Age.
Really like him. Snow Crash, one of my favorite novels. I thought The Diamond Age was like not that good, and I think a lot of it was, I think the primer was sort of meant to like inspire awe as this like perfect teaching tool and stuff. But I think everything always being at the same difficulty is not the best way to go about teaching things, honestly. During high school, there was some times where there might be a problem or something that I didn't really get. But I always kind of felt if I spent like an hour or two on anything, I would figure it out. But then going to study physics in college, there would be often times where there'd be like a problem, and I would just like spend 6 hours on it and make no progress whatsoever. And that kind of sucks. But sometimes on the 7th hour, I would figure it out. And that feels really fucking good. There's a certain type of learning there which requires this just like thinking about something for a long time and specifically like not really knowing if you're capable of it, that the book doesn't really talk about, because she never comes across a problem that she can't solve, right? Because of like the environment in which it's given to her, it's like guaranteed that every problem she sees will be solvable, and she knows she can solve it. And I feel like there's a fundamental important thing of learning there that's like missing.
Another form of knowledge that the primer kind of glosses over is tacit knowledge. You guys are describing it sort of a form of tacit knowledge, but I was more thinking of embodied knowledge. You know, when you can kind of just know something by looking at it, or you know how to do something in this very specific way that works, but you're not really able to articulate this knowledge. The main character does do some experiential learning, but it's definitely a really big assumption to think that the entire embodied knowledge of some complicated task could be encoded programmatically. If you see some martial arts master, they're probably not going to be able to tell you in explicit terms all of the knowledge that they have. You can work with them to progress towards what that is, especially if they're a really good teacher, but ultimately, like, it's not really stuff that can be gained from a book or from a computer. And they touched on this a little bit in the Alchemist story as well. There are some things where you can't just read in a book. You also need to work with some other alchemist who needs to transmit this knowledge to you by you kind of following their practice and just implicitly picking up things that they're doing. Maybe this is not really relevant in a future where somehow they've just figured out all tacit knowledge, but just from an engineering perspective, like, that felt like the least plausible part of it to me.
I definitely feel like we're kind of moving in that direction, though. There's already like AI-assisted coaching programs for like sports and stuff that will allow like a coach to be able to see like the body alignment or specific movements on an athlete, and then be able to give like more targeted feedback, where like I think a lot of like specifically physical motion coaching in the past has been a very skilled person who's also very skilled at noticing and then articulating what things should change. The addition of systems that can like map the human body in ways that like the human brain cannot do consciously, and be able to show that to a coach makes it a lot easier for a coach to be able to like personalize and like specify their feedback in ways that like have not been done before. So I don't think that it's like super outlandish that eventually some sort of system could be developed to do something like is described in the primer.
Obviously, I think there will be progress towards tacit knowledge being cracked, so to speak. But in our current age, we tend to be a lot more arrogant about the possibility of technology to kind of like unveil all knowledge. I'm not saying it's an impossible task, but it certainly feels like an intimidating engineering problem, even compared to like figuring out exactly what someone will understand.
To be clear, like also my example like fully included like the addition of like an additional human to interpret whatever results are being given. Like no actual interpretation is being made by such a system. So there's like no reason why there would never like there's no reason why there would ever stop being a need for an additional human interpreter. And if there is, there would still have to be somebody behind the scenes making decisions about like what feedback is correct.
A lot of curriculums are trying to remove a lot of the rote memorization aspects. But while I think that is directionally correct from how education probably was in the, say, 19th century, you do lose something. There is some knowledge to be gained by just doing a lot of multiplication problems over and over and over and over. You actually kind of have these inequitable effects where for people that maybe have a better conceptual understanding of math, it's not as quite as important. But for people that like maybe don't, it's really important to just build that intuition by having them like do a problem and then like do another problem. And it's like do another problem. And I think that if you take too much rote out of the equation, then you lose something.
Yeah, or even just from a pragmatic perspective, I think I learned the 1-digit multiplication times tables when I was in like first grade or something. And I think over the course of my life, like the amount of time I spent to memorize those compared to like the amount of time I've saved by being able to instantly do 1-digit multiplication in my head, 80 times as much at least. Yeah, like that'll, doing those sorts of problems will help me like understand multiplication on a deeper level. But also rote memorization of things will just let you do the things faster in the future. A lot of people hear 7 times 9. Maybe they think about it for like 5 seconds. Maybe some finger counting goes on. I'm not exactly sure, right? And then it's like, it's 63, I think, right? If I think of that, my brain isn't even thinking about multiplication. It's not thinking about the number 7 or the number 9. It's just something hard-coded in there at this point that it's 63. And I think there's something to be said for like that level of memorization where it doesn't even require any form of thought.
I feel like I have some weird synesthesia going on with multiplication tables where like for 7 times 9 specifically, like I don't really know why, but I just really think of the Pokemon Bronzong. I think it's because I had like a level 63 Bronzong like in my party, and like I learned the 7 times 9 was
what you're about
63.
to say.
I'm like,
Yeah, I thought you were gonna say like, it was purple. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and so like I'm just like, oh yeah, 7 times 9, and then like there's just like kind of like the outline of like the bottom of this Bronzong, and then I like see like fucking Bronzong in my party is like level 63. I'm like, oh, it's 63. But then like I also kind of have like less ridiculous shit. Like I think for like 6 times 8, it just feels like kind of like vaguely green and purple.
The way I originally learned the times table so well was I had a placemat that just had all the times tables on it. And when I was a little kid, a lot of the time I would just be waiting for food. Like, where's my food, right? And I'm sitting in my chair and there's like the placemat there, and I like look at the placemat. And actually I had a bunch of these placemats. I think they're just a really effective way to learn things. I think people underestimate the amount of time kids just sit places. I imagine it happens a lot less now because maybe now you just give your kid an iPad and they're always just like swiping through TikTok or whatever. But placemats are a really good way to learn things in this way. When I was like 4, I randomly memorized like the first 110 elements. That's kind of wild. I'm pretty surprised that I was able to do that as a 4-year-old. I could maybe do that now with a lot of work, but I definitely don't still have that now. I had like one for flags. I knew like most of the flags. I had one for planet. It had like some specific stats, so I just like randomly know exactly the size, the distance to the sun of like Jupiter's orbit or something like that. There's one for musical instruments, which is pretty cool. But yeah, just in general, did either of you ever have like placemats or maybe posters as well that you could like look at on the wall or something? That was a similar sort of thing.
One poster that I really remember was this poster of the rainforest canopy. It just had all of the like different animals, like capybara, sloth. I think this was supposed to be a canopy in like Australia or something, just based on the content of the of the scene. But one thing they had at the very top was a bird-eating spider. For a while, the bottom part of the poster was just like covered by like stuff that I had, and so the only thing that I could really see super well was like some kind of like eagle or falcon, and then like the bird-eating spider. And so I rarely remember like this bird-eating spider. And I remember one time I was like on this like river rafting tour of nature and stuff. And like this guy was just talking about like birds. And he was just like, do you guys have any ideas as to what this bird's like natural predator is? And I was just like, like maybe like the bird-eating spider. And like, I get that was kind of an absurd answer, but everyone in this raft just like mercilessly like made fun of me for like the whole time. Like, haha, that's like not a real thing. Like there's no such thing as a bird-eating spider. And I'm like, I swear there's like a thing. And like, don't you remember? It's like on the poster in my room. And they're like, haha, like, that's not like a thing that's real. And I thought that was kind of upsetting. I think they should have been more charitable because it was in fact a thing.
It just is not that thing, fair. I guess.
Yeah, like, was it likely to be the case in whatever river you were in? No, but it's totally understandable how you came to that point.
Yeah, I think that it is really kind of an unpleasant experience as a kid to be very confident that something is correct, but not really have a way to articulate like why that is, because you just don't have the authority of an adult to get people to believe you. Like it does kind of make you conscious of like how much of people believing truth is related to ethos, and just not the content of what you're actually saying. And like, I think that there were some times when I was a kid where people just wouldn't take me seriously simply because I was a kid and not really engage with the actual substance of what I was saying. And that was always kind of sad, especially because I think that adults do have a way of like ganging up on a kid, I feel like, if they think the kid is wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think adults like underestimate kids all the time, and I'm like definitely like guilty of that. I feel like I was somewhat like I had some intervention early because I was like a tutor for elementary school kids when I was in high school, and I was like pretty often surprised by like how much like kids knew, even though they were like 10 years younger than me. But I was like also often surprised by like how little kids knew, I guess. So I don't know. I think that adults just like don't remember like what it's like to be a kid. Like they do, but like they don't really. And like that's probably still true for me today.
Connected to that, Kevin, I feel like I had that experience a lot as a kid as well. And I think it specifically was an outgrowth of I was just a very confident kid in general. So regardless of my confidence about something, I would just be extremely confident about it and like get into arguments about my with my parents about it. And then like it would eventually like result in, them looking something up or whatnot. And I would like lose these arguments most of the time because I was just overly confident about things. But, every once in a while there's something that like I just like knew, right? And I knew I knew. And, I would have like bet my life on it basically. And I just remember that it would just that whenever that would happen, because of like my overuse of being confident, I would just have no way to portray this to someone else. And that would be so aggravating because it'd be like, oh, like Gordon, you're confident about this thing again, but like they wouldn't really believe me, and like rightfully so from looking at the evidence. But I do feel like there's a sort of thing where sometimes you do just like know something and it's just it feels just a very different category of like knowledge or memory where yeah, a lot of the time remembering things you can legitimately remember the thing, but it still doesn't quite feel like 100% guaranteed like you would bet your life on it. But like some things do feel like that. And I feel like that's a sort of hard thing to convey. I wish that was kind of easier to convey in general, outside of just being very confident.
One of the most disconcerting experiences that I had when I was a kid is when I was actually that sure about something and I learned it to be false, which was specifically when I learned that Santa was not real. Specifically, I had this very vivid dream of walking out of my room, my actual room that I was in on like December 24th, and just going out into the main room and looking at this very realistic scene of all the presents. And then Santa was just like on the couch, just like eating the cookies, just like talking to my parents about like, how the kids have been doing and like present logistics and shit. And I was just like, whoa, it's Santa. And then I just like went back to my bed and like fell asleep. And then the next morning I actually woke up with no reason to believe that that didn't just 100% totally happen. And so I ended up committing to this belief that Santa existed for probably a much longer time. And I had to come up with like increasingly complicated hopes for how Santa could actually be real. I remember there was this one time where I was in bed and I was just thinking about Santa and I was just like, I wonder how like negotiating with Santa works. Like, because your kid tells you what you want and then you kind of have to like place in like a mail order request into Santa to like, get the thing manufactured at the North Pole. And then I was like, okay, well, the North Pole doesn't have like infinite economic resources. So there's probably some kind of limit on how expensive each gift that Santa can take in. And maybe that's like proportional to how good they are or something. So then I just like was like, yeah, I wonder like what Santa's like kind of like standard item gift limit is. Like that seems like kind of important information. So I went down to my mom and my dad and I basically like said this in like, 7-year-old speak or whatever, like 8-year-old speak. And then they were confused why I would go through like that much like mental gymnastics to justify this proposition that's like obviously false. And they were kind of just like, Kevin, like, we have to tell you something. Like, Santa's not real. And then my reaction wasn't like, oh, like, my reaction was like, no, he is real because I'm 100% sure that like this one thing happened. And my parents were just kind of like, what the heck? Kind of had to like walk them through this process that maybe they didn't entirely understand, but they produced some pretty compelling evidence that Santa was not real. And I was like, okay, that seems reasonable to me. Um, but it was still kind of, I don't know, jarring. And it definitely gave me less confidence in my future beliefs. I think that's kind of still the case.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I don't think I've had anything happen to that extent. Like, I've been very confident about things before, and had them not be true. But yeah, I don't think to the extent you're describing that.
I was gonna say I think the closest thing to me being like extremely confident that I did something or like that I knew something is like probably just like in math, and then I just like made a computation error or something, and I'm like, but like my process was like fully correct. I like definitely did this correctly. This is fully correct, and then I just didn't. I don't know that I've had like some strong worldview belief about something to be true to be like just like fully proven false before,
Mhm.
which I imagine is
Yeah.
pretty jarring.
And I don't think like my conceptually like I think that people roast kids a lot for believing in Santa, but like I don't think my conceptualization of Santa like as it was really like that crazy. Like,
I don't know. People
obviously some
roast kids
doubts.
about believing in Santa, but there's still like a group lie happening to children that Santa is real, which I feel like is just very bizarre to me. Like the concept of Santa is bizarre to me.
I kind of like Santa as sort of like a shit test for like kids being critical thinkers.
I
Like
mean, I
I guess I
guess,
would
but
like
it's like so odd that there's like this group lie, like yes, like Santa is real, but then like kids get roasted for believing in Santa.
are you guys pro Santa? Are you going to tell your kids that Santa's real?
I'm pretty pro Santa, to be honest.
I'm like,
I
I am, I understanding what I just said. I am like pro Santa, like,
Like how pro
but
Santa? Like would you be
but
pissed if
like,
someone told your kid that Santa was like not real like at a really young age?
uh,
uh, I mean,
I don't.
I guess I'm pro Santa as a concept, but I don't actually know that I will tell my children that Santa is real.
Oh, that's kind of what I meant. Like, will you tell your kids Santa is real?
Oh, probably not.
Yeah, I think I would. And it depends on the situation. I think if it was just like, I don't know, randomly overheard or something. I think if someone was just like deliberately trying to fuck with me, and their, course of action was like, like Gordon has like a 4-year-old. That's a prime target for this, info hazard or whatever. I think I would be pretty annoyed at that. But yeah, I do kind of like it as a thing of. I feel like I remember learning Santa was not real. I was actually like hanging out with a friend and like talking through it and then like reasoned it out. This is when I was like 7, I think 6 or 7, probably. And yeah, I remember that. This is a pretty positive memory because it was sort of just like a, like pure like kid rationality, sort of like realizing this thing, and it felt pretty satisfying.
Yeah, I wasn't mad to find out that Santa was real. Like I sort of felt like I had like when you like beat the Pokemon League and then you like go into that one like the Hall of Fame and you're like, oh, you're part of this like secret club now. Like that's kind of how I felt. Like they were like, oh yeah, this friend that like they already know that Santa is not real. And I was just like, oh, but like I'm a year younger than them, so I'm flexing. Like,
Interesting.
like
Okay,
I
I
did kind
was
of feel like I had passed some sort of coming of age ritual.
okay. I could be convinced to tell Mike. I don't know that I'll like explicitly be like Santa is real. It might just. Did anybody like have someone be like explicitly like Santa is real?
I mean, it was very heavily implied. Like we always like left out like cookies and milk and whatnot, for Santa when Santa would come and stuff. And I guess like it was never explicitly said, but I think it would have been more off-putting if my dad was like, yeah, like by the way, those cookies and milk, like I'm not gonna eat them. Santa's gonna eat them. I'd be like, yeah, I know, like they're for Santa. But
Yeah, I feel like there was some. I think that it was kind of known that that was the case. I also didn't believe that, like, I think it's pretty obvious that mall Santa is not Santa. Like, at least it was to me. Just the impossibility of having like many simultaneous Santas.
I could be potentially convinced to do Santa. I was like not really planning to do Santa, or like that was not really a thing. But like remembering like sussing out whether or not Santa is real is like kind of making me be like, maybe this is like the kid equivalent of like giving them a 10-hour problem set that they like won't solve.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's true, actually.
Like, I don't know. I would be like so. I feel like I would be like so proud when my kid figures out that Santa's not real. Like, if they did
For like
that, I wouldn't want to
logical
like
reasons.
deprive them
Okay,
of that.
okay, okay.
Like,
I think I could be, yeah, like I think I could be convinced to like do Santa. I was like not planning to. But my parents did for like the like mall Santas where they were like Santa's helpers, where like Santa like contract workers to like go
yeah,
in his
yeah. No,
place because he
that's how I
can't be
thought of
there.
like mall Santa. Like, I was like, oh, this isn't like actual Santa, but like some sort of like representative that signed a contract with like his North Pole like enterprise or whatever.
Yeah, that's
Um,
like basically like the reasoning. My parents never called. I thought this was interesting. My parents never called like seeing Santa in places like seeing Santa. They were like, we're going to go see Santa's helpers, which I felt like was like a pretty interesting tactic on their part.
yeah, that's kind of big brain. Like, my aunt employed kind of elaborate gaslighting for Santa being real. Like, I remember them creating reindeer poop in like the alley, like where Santa would like park or whatever.
You know what this just reminded me of? When I was like 4, I was at like this Christmas party, and all of the kids were in the basement watching Frosty the Snowman, and all of the adults were like, kids come upstairs, Santa is flying away right now. And like, of course, everybody like ran upstairs, right? Because they're like, oh, like we're gonna see Santa, right? Like he's in his sleigh, like he's flying his sleigh right now. And then like by the time everyone got upstairs, all the adults were like, oh, you missed him, you were too slow.
That's pretty funny.
It's pretty funny. Yeah.
And like
It
at
sounds
the
like
time,
it'd
I
be
was like
so
so
fun to
pissed.
do
I
as an
was like,
adult.
oh my god, we were like
I
too
respect the
slow to go
hustle.
see Santa. But like that just reminded me of that, and I was like, oh my god. Every single adult at that party, they were probably like drunk too. We're like, you know, it would be so funny to tell all of the kids to come
That'd be
up
so fucking funny.
and then tell them that they're
I
too
feel like
late to see Santa.
I feel like that's the more like positive energy version of, the people like dunking on you for believing the spider eating bird was true. It's like
Oh, yeah, definitely.
yeah, definitely like similar vibe. Like the group of adults just like pointing at the kids, be like, ha 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 ha. They're
I'm
fucking
like so
stupid.
shook
But
because
it's
I
like
just
weirdly
realized that I
charming
got
in this
dunked on
case.
as a kid for that. Like that
Well,
memory just reappeared.
well, I guess I was more talking about like specifically when there's kind of like one kid though. Like, I think that adults are sort of like, in some situations, adults are kind of ready to like line up to like, set a kid right on what is true, sort of, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, they're all ready to jump in and like, yeah, you're like super wrong, like they're all they're all ready to like lay down the truth or hammer or whatever. I don't know how relevant this is, but another, I just think there was a lot of really interesting lore around Santa, belief in Santa and similar truth seeking related activities. Like, I remember one thing that was really cool to me is I think there was a certain point at which I realized that Santa, as it was portrayed in media, couldn't be like strictly true. Like, I didn't think every aspect of the Santa myth could actually be 100% accurate. Like, I assume that they took some creative liberties and like Elf first. I feel like I weirdly thought that Elf was like pretty canon, so maybe that's a bad example. But I remember like there was this one time where there was like an older kid, like maybe a year older, and he was talking to me and like after school, and he was like, you know what, Kevin? I set up a video camera like next to my Christmas tree last like a few weeks ago when it was Christmas Eve, and when I checked the tape the next morning, I looked at it, and if you go to like right around like midnight, the tree like it started to like rotate. And then like it started to like spin really fast, and it was like glowing. And then like, after a certain point it like slowed down and just like slowly stopped spinning. Only now there were just like presents were like all around the tree, and like I was just like, what? I didn't like believe him, but I was like, why would he make this up? Like I sort of believed him. Like I feel like it just kind of added to the whole like weirdness around the whole affair, where like I wasn't fully ready yet to accept that Santa didn't exist or just nothing magical existed related to Santa because of my my prior belief. But like this both clashed with established canonical knowledge and also like my 100% sure belief of the existence and behavior of Santa. So with that thing, I was really just like, whoa, like what the heck? I was definitely like a little bit too believing of things that people said as a kid, but I feel like I was pretty good at integrating these things, like trying to reconcile them.
Yeah, I think I'm pro Santa now. I think I will. I think I'm pro. Before I thought it was just
Conversions
like,
are happening on this podcast.
yeah, well, I mean, like, my like previous thing was just like, I think it's like weird to like expect a kid to like believe something and like have all indications that this thing is true, and then just like dunk on them when it's not. But like, I don't know. I think that, yeah, again, I think it's like the kid equivalent of just like giving them this problem set that's going to take them forever, and just like understanding that like the main learning is like dying a bit inside.
Yeah, also, it's like, it's one thing to think about from like the kid's perspective, but from the adult's perspective, you get to dunk on the kids a little bit. And that's kind of
creative. You can make some fake reindeer poop. Like I think it would be kind of really satisfying to leave some evidence that like is kind of like a little bit hard to find, but you somehow found out that like your kid discovered the evidence. Maybe hiding like a tuft of like reindeer hair on like a bush or something, and then the kid being like, "Hey, like I found this hair like on the bush," and you're just like, "Oh wow, that's crazy."
I used to think that like Santa was like more for like recreating the magic of like when you believed that Santa was true. And like to like I just like don't value that much, I guess. So that's why I was like anti-Santa in some ways also. But I am like pro like making my kid confront me about lying to them.
I think that's
like
a kind of wild take. I respect it. Like
I don't know. I feel like
I didn't really vibe with Santa because it had all this like people were doing it because it felt all like magical and feel good and because it made them happy or whatever. It's like fuck that. Like I want to do Santa because I want my kid to know when they're lying to me.
Going back to the alchemist story, I just wanted to revisit who Scott Alexander actually is because a lot of our audience might be unfamiliar. So Scott Alexander is a blogger based out of the Bay Area who has become quite popular in tech circles. And even though he's most famous for writing informative blog posts about stuff like psychiatry and pharmacology and politics, he's also written quite a bit of fiction, and the fiction usually plays a lot with constraints, whether that's reality or belief systems, and then trying to reconcile them in interesting and entertaining ways. And one of the most interesting stories that he wrote was this story called "And I Show You How Deep the Rabbit Hole Goes," which is based on this Tumblr post where there are these superpowered pills that are offered to you. And it's kind of a ridiculous premise, but he takes it to an interesting place.
Okay, so there's 8 pills. There's the yellow pill, which gives you the ability to read and search the minds of anyone you can see, even if it's a picture. You can also turn their minds off to put them into a coma. There's the green pill that gives you the ability to shapeshift into any animal. The blue pill, so where you can fly, swim, and teleport to any area while being impervious to physical dangers. The orange pill that lets you instantly master any sport, job, activity that a human can do. The red pill gives you super speed, super strength, and rapid regeneration, but you're not invincible. The pink pill gives you the ability to make any person love you with a single touch, but you turn off the effect by retouching the person. The gray pill gives you the ability to control any machine or electronic using only your mind. You also have the ability to generate powerful electrical discharges by touch. And the black pill gives you the ability to see up to 1 month into the future.
it basically imagines like a different person took each of these pills and how that plays out, sort of into the far future for like, you know, the fate of humanity kind of. Um, and I
It's
think
very
something
kind.
that
There's very much like a gradual lead into this, because it's actually told in second person. And so it's initially pitched as a story about you. You know, like it's very much like, oh, this is what happens to you when you pick the pill and you do this. But then they kind of gradually start to fill in like lore that definitely does not apply to you specifically.
something the story does kind of successfully is all these powers kind of sound great at first, and they all are like give you more power, right? So if you're searching power in your life, it's easy to view them all as positive. But I think some of them are like pretty clearly negative, or the benefits are just like not that much. Um, you know, even I would probably pick the orange one, which basically allows you to master any skill. But even that, I feel like, is basically taking out a significant portion of the human condition where you'd be like unable to learn anything or get better at anything really ever again, and that kind of sucks. And I think if you have enough of a superiority complex as I do, maybe that can be like overcome. Like, you know, the happiness generated by it would be fine, and you would be able to do a lot of good in the world, which is awesome as well. But yeah, some of these I feel like kind of just suck though.
I've actually asked a modified version of this question to many people where the powers are more balanced, and there's been some pretty interesting justifications. I remember I asked this international student, and he picked the green pill. I was really surprised because I don't think anyone I had asked had picked the green pill before. His justification for picking the green pill was that he thought that being able to experience life as other animals would just kind of like elevate your state of consciousness in like a way that you would not be able to with like any of the other pills. And he like really would want to have the experience of being embodied as like, some other non-human being. And I was kind of just like, whoa.
That is pretty wild. I do think there's like a bit of outlier among the pills, which is basically the black pill, which allows you to see into the future. Because I would say to some extent it like is kind of just on another level of power from any of the pills. All the other pills kind of they're not really doing possible things, but they're doing things sort of that like the totality of humanity can do, at least. Seeing into the future is kind of a
Way
different
more powerful
level.
than any of the other.
You can see a month into the future, but as is, you know, quickly realized by the person who takes the black pill in the story, you can sort of just like infinitely write notes to yourself from the far future, because, you know, if you see yourself writing a note from 1 month in the future, and that person sees someone 1 month in the future writing a note and whatnot, you can like pass something down from, you know, really quite far in the future. And in the story, this ends up being like from the heat death of the universe. But at the same time, I think picking the black pill is basically, you know, sort of forfeiting your chance to like enjoy life, I guess. It's kind of making this sacrifice for like, okay, I'm gonna pick something, you know, purely altruistically, instead of goal of having a good life myself. I think something interesting about this story is whether there's some sort of like, if you came into contact with this choice, whether you have like an moral obligation to pick the black pill.
One short story that the Scott Alexander pill story really reminds me of is Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, because I think that the experience of the black pill user and the protagonist of Story of Your Life is actually pretty similar. For those unfamiliar, Ted Chiang is a pretty famous sci-fi short story writer right now, maybe the most famous. And his story, Story of Your Life, was the basis for the movie Arrival. And Arrival and Story of Your Life explore how the language that you know influences your perception of reality. And in particular, the language that the protagonist of Story of Your Life grasps from these aliens influences their perception of time. And this, in many ways, makes their existence kind of similar to the black pill user from the Scott Alexander story. So I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about the story of your life protagonist? And do you think it would be preferable to be the story of your life protagonist or the black pill user? And what do you think is similar between these stories and what's not similar?
I read this story quite recently, actually, yesterday, and I really liked it, which I was surprised by because I watched the movie Arrival when it came out, and I thought the movie was like pretty good, but honestly, I like mainly liked it for the visuals and the side effects, and I thought the aliens looked really cool and the ships looked really cool, and I thought I was pretty mid on the plot. And the main reason I was mid on the plot is because it felt like it assumed this sort of like deterministic outcome, and they didn't really like get me to believe in it. You know, as a free will enjoyer and believer, like you have to do some work to get me like to believe in your deterministic universe. So in the experience of watching the movie, I was kind of left feeling like, just like, why doesn't she just do something different? And I sort of understood that that wasn't like the point of the movie, but still was like a nagging thought on the back of my mind. But I feel like actually reading the story was a lot better, and that thought kind of went away because it sort of describes like this process of, once you are in this form where you are not experiencing time like sequentially, and everything kind of you have a perception of your whole life, maybe not at like once, but there's no causal chain that you can draw through all your actions. Like the way they describe the protagonist acting is very different, and it's like less of like a choosing to do something, but more of just like being like forcefully like pulled into action. You lose your free will. So I think the movie, it sort of felt like a deterministic universe where in the story, it really felt like the protagonist just lost her ability to have free will, which she like previously had due to learning this language. And as a result, like I think to some sense, I think it was like akin to dying, and it's a long way of saying like this would be very not preferable for me, and I would view it similar to like just dying, but I feel like to some extent, yeah, she just got like turned into an inanimate object, if you have a chair or something, and maybe you can imagine the chair is conscious, right? But let's say the chair has, yeah, maybe it is, right? But it has no ability to sense the world or do any actions out towards the world, right? And maybe for that chair, time has no meaning, and that chair experiences, the whole history of the universe and its existence or whatever, at once, and it like, has knowledge of all things, but I wouldn't really call it alive in that situation. And I feel like that's basically what happened to the protagonist of Arrival. Like it looks like she's doing things and whatnot, but to a certain extent, I don't know, maybe you could like contrive some situation in which you make it so it looks like a chair is doing things. But
That's
it's
so
really no
interesting
different.
that you bring that up, because I felt like when I watched the movie, I actually had the sense that like she was out of control. Like when she got all the flashbacks with her having, or flash fours or whatever, of her like having arguments. I don't even remember the guy's name anymore, but like having arguments with her like husband, about like why she was doing things or like what choices she was making. I very much felt like I was perceiving her just being like out of control. So I actually felt like that was like pretty effectively portrayed. But I do agree that like reading the story, it clicked a lot better for me. Like I just sort of had like this weird like dreamlike sense where like things were just like sort of like happening around her, and like she couldn't really explain it. And like this was causing conflict, like interpersonal conflicts, and like deep sadness. Once I read it, I sort of like understood like why I had that sense.
I think the interpersonal conflict stuff was sort of removed. It was not really there that much in the story. Maybe it was somewhat implied, like that, they divorce. But you don't really know anything about why, and it could be for any number of reasons. And I feel like, to some extent, like it makes sense to add more. Like it was a pretty short story.
Yeah, it's like a pretty short
like
story.
a full film. You want to like flesh out the characters more and their relationships and whatnot. But I think actually like having it in the story, her perception of reality, it just like doesn't change at all how she's interacting with the outside world. And that kind of is more what made it believable to me. Because in the movie, it sort of felt like, you know, she couldn't like act, but it was still like leaking out a bit. Like, it still caused conflict that, you know, she was in this different like state where she didn't really have free will. Where it felt like in the story, from an outsider's perspective, nothing changed, which like I guess made it a bit more believable to me, because it's like if you're sort of able to like show discomfort or whatever, it feels like you should be able to act. But if you're not even able to do that, then like it makes more sense for me to like perceive you as kind of just completely lacking will.
So in your
I see what you're saying.
conceptualization of the story, like, did you see the other characters as having free will, and that like just by learning this language you lose that ability, or is it just
Yeah,
you become
basically.
aware? Okay, okay.
Oh, interesting. I thought I felt like it was more like you become aware there isn't really free will, and it just like happens.
Yeah, that's what I thought while watching the movie. And, you know, maybe that's the correct take to have, or the take he was going for. But I think it's an interesting idea to think about, to like imagine you know, the language like literally just like taking away your agency.
Yeah, I definitely think it's like a more interesting take. I just did not have that take, and I still don't think I really have that take.
Yeah, that is the take I got upon reading it.
When I was watching the movie, it felt to me as if he was addicted, or like being pulled into the worldview without an ability to stop it, and that's like what made her become aware of the lack of free will.
You can view it as an addiction, but once you've learned this language and you can perceive reality in this way, it's kind of unavoidable.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. I was comparing it to an addiction in that like you can see yourself doing things but are incapable of stopping.
Yeah.
Or like some sort of state where you are out of control and you are aware that you are out of control.
I do have some amount of fear of getting super addicted to something, because I similarly feel like that is somewhat similar to death. In like
Losing
you know,
yourself in something.
Yeah, if you're addicted to a point of really just having no power over choosing to do a drug or something, I mean, it's not going to encompass completely all facets of your life, but I feel like you are losing a lot of your humanity in that situation. But yeah, Kevin, do you agree with my take or Merrick's take?
It's hard because I guess I don't really believe in the whole like separation of authorial intent all that hard. Like, I think that what the author was going for like does kind of matter.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but, like,
Oh.
you know, like just based on that and also other shit Ted Chiang has said, I'm pretty confident that he intended the deterministic interpretation to be correct. But in terms of maybe if I try to like suspend my disbelief for a second, I agree with your criticism of the film, even though I think it makes it a better film. Like, it does really make it less believable. But I think it's like a rare viewer who will actually think about it like all that hard, you know, especially compared to a lot of other plot holes that science fiction films have.
Yeah,
But
I'm specifically really reticent to believe in determinism. I will like happily believe in like some random other shit.
I don't know if I can really have an opinion on this because I'm just so anchored by the movie and it being a while ago, and also what I know about Ted Chiang's beliefs.
Okay, could you try to sell me on the importance of what authorial intent is? Because, you know, I'm sort of the perspective that you know, the artist produces the art, and their intent is like infused in that art, and you know, they can shape the art however they want to achieve their goal, but then the consumer of the art views the art, and at the end of the day, it is like, you know, if the artist successfully portrays their original intent, great. But if they don't, that's kind of a fault of the artist, not of the consumer. The art's true meaning is not actually bestowed in it by its creator.
My perspective is maybe kind of moderate, but I think that art can be appreciated in many different frames or contexts. And I think that the default frame just sort of assumes that the author has been successful in, or it assumes that like what you get out of the art is what the author intended to put in the art. And I think that once you start appreciating it for things that you have reason to believe the author didn't put there, you're kind of appreciating it in this like other context. It's still like a valid context, but like I wouldn't say that like for example, there's this album I forget exactly what it's called, but like there's this artist named Emily Montez, who's basically this 6-year-old or something, or 5-year-old, I think, that submitted this album to Spotify, and you can listen to it. And it's kind of just gibberish, like she's just like saying that she's 5 with like all this super garbled auto tune. But there's a lot of people who unironically kind of enjoy it. Like they admire how it kind of reminds them of maybe artists like Charlie XCX or just other people in the PC music ecosystem. And I think that's a perfectly valid way to appreciate this art and have this art experience. But I would consider that to be a fully different kind of art experience than one in which someone like Charlie XCX is creating some art for like some specific purpose and then you consume it in that way. I don't think that it makes this other way of consuming the art invalid, but I definitely take that into account. To me, it feels like a different sort of experience, and it feels weird for them to just totally be treated the same.
I definitely see the view there. I just disagree with it. But it makes artists less important to some extent.
I have spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I've actually had some pretty interesting conversations with composers. Not as much like other forms of artists, but like for me, I think my view is like pretty close to Gordon. Like the artist like does not actually matter that much. Like I just create things and like people experience them, and whatever they take away is like what they take away. And in some ways, like I feel like when I make something and then I like share what it's supposed to be, I'm like taking away from that experience because I'm imposing a specific impression that was supposed to be made. And that like removes some of the experience. And like some of the most interesting conversations I've had are like of other people's impressions of a thing that I made. Because I just think that's like so much cooler to talk about than like them talking about the thing that I said that it was about. Like that's just like not an interesting conversation to have to me.
Yeah, I do get pretty annoyed, I guess, by artists declaring what their intent is. Or maybe you're on like Reddit or something and you're deep in the comments and there's like some argument about I don't know, whatever's happening in some media piece and like someone's like, oh well actually like in this one speech, the author like mentioned that this is true, so like this person's right. And I'm always kind of just like you're just ruining a perfectly good argument. Like, who the fuck is like no one cares what the author has to say in this situation. I feel like
well, I think I kind of agree. Like you
completely.
Can choose to view the art like taking into account like whatever the creator has added to it or like commented about it. I personally would refrain from commenting about like my own things that I have made, but like. If some creator wants to, I think that's totally valid, and it's like also totally valid for somebody to want to use that to inform their own interpretation. I just think that it's like not that relevant. It's just another person's interpretation of the object that has been made, and the fact that the person is the origin of that object is like not relevant.
At least for me, I just feel like that's the default frame in which I engage with art, and I definitely have to like do effort to transition to this other frame. I guess for me personally, I think even if I were to accept that the author doesn't really matter, I think that that's still the default attitude through which I would approach art, just like instinctively. And I would have to like actively kind of like claw my way over to this other context. But I don't really like think I will get there. Just because, for one thing, I think that it is in itself an expression of authorial intent to not share your intent. Like, I see
Yeah,
that
sure.
as a pretty big decision.
Yeah.
And to me, like, I would actually put way more value on a piece of art, like, um, well, maybe not, maybe way more is kind of extreme, but like, I think that if an artist were to kind of say, like, you know, um, this is not really, like, I don't really feel like I should give my opinion on this versus like the other case where they sort of like don't give their opinion, but like someone just kind of like randomly asks them and they're like, oh, like this thing. Like, I guess I would have more respect for the first piece of art, sort of. Maybe I would just have more respect for the artist. But I think that I also have always had more of an interest in, I think I've always had more of an interest in artists than art. It's hard for me to connect with an artwork without having some sense of the artist and like what I think about their aesthetic vision.
I do think so. A big topic, at least for like composition things, I think the same thing is probably for like visual art as well, is like some sort of program note or description that you often have to submit or include for some showing or whatever. Um, and my instinct has always been to say what I was thinking about, or but not give anything further than that. Just to sort of like place somebody in whatever frame of mind somebody like I was in at the time, or in if somebody so desires, but not to like give any interpretation or like meaning to what I was saying. So, for example, I might be like, I have been thinking about growing up recently, and that would be like the whole description, and sort of let that be the backdrop, and not really be like any statement on it, but sort of be like just like an additional part to the thing that I made. I think I told you about this opera that I saw. It's by a composer. His name's Michael Hersch, and I spent much of my undergrad talking with him about art and its purpose and how we engage with it. Really interesting guy if you ever get the chance. But his most recent opera is not, there's like no explicit plot. It's mostly fragments of poetry, often overlapping, and the description is mostly that it's an opera about relationships, and that's the whole thing. There's like other writing because people find it interesting, but the main descriptor is just that it's an opera about relationships, and you can interpret it however you want going from there. And I think that having some context about what it's about, but like not too much, is basically like kind of the sweet spot. But at the same time, I don't know that it's like super important to have any description at all.
It's good to have something there to like try and make someone think in a direction, I guess, sort of, because in comparison to a film or a novel, if you're listening to music, it's like there's a much greater range of places you could potentially go. You're not getting like direct language, and I think it's good to like narrow people's scope a bit, because otherwise it's just like, a lot of times, at least I know for me, I won't really think of anything in particular. I'll just kind of like, I might be immersed in the music right now, a little bit, but it might not make me think of anything in particular. But if there's like a bit of guidance, but not too much, like I'll start thinking about stuff and whatnot. But then if you put like a 2-3 paragraphs splurge of like everything that's happening in your childhood and whatnot that like led you to this composition, like that's probably not going to be as engaging for me in listening to the song as well, because it's it's not my life, and I won't be able to connect it to things I care about as well.
At least for me, especially when it comes to music, the art is the artist. Like when I listen to Charlie XCX, the main thing I'm consuming is Charlie XCX, not the Charlie XCX song. I mean, that's kind of like a pop music specific thing, but that is also even kind of the intent. Like you're meant to build this brand image for consumption. I think it's especially the case for Taylor Swift. I think Taylor Swift is like pretty explicitly the art. And so what she thinks and believes actually does matter because she is the art object in question.
I think a lot of people have a strong urge to like learn everything about the band and the conditions that led to this album and like about the production. I've never really had that urge that much. Sometimes maybe I'm be really interested about something and I'll look up some stuff about it. But I do think it kind of drives from that thing of like, I have the complete thing right here. I don't need anything more.
I think the best argument against authorial intent is just Star Wars again. Like the original Star Wars movies have been lost to time because they were revised so many times by this auteur who never knew when to stop touching the art that he made. And I definitely find these things to just be like very cringy. I don't know what that says about how I engage with Star Wars, but maybe it's because I see Star Wars as a lot more of like a communal enterprise. Like there's kind of this third frame that I can jump into, which is like, oh, it's this art thing that, I care about from the perspective of like all the people who have contributed to it creatively. But yeah, like I definitely think that I start in this first frame of caring about authorial intent. And like, I guess you could also rephrase that as consuming the artist as part of the art.
How do you feel when like consuming, I don't know, like AI art where there's no thought behind it at all? Does this just like completely destroy your experience of it or?
Kind of, yeah. My cope is that it's sort of this composite authorial intent
of just like all the people that like created the training data that fed into it, or like okay.
Well, and the prompt engineer or whatever.
Mm-hmm. I do kind of view that as like one of like the negatives of mine and Merrick's view is that it sort of creates the conclusion that there's not like a guaranteed place for like human artists in the future, where to some extent with your worldview there was like always a bit of a guaranteed
there is some conflict that I have where I strongly believe in like the human role in creating art, but I also like find looking at AI art like very interesting. So I just tend not to consume very much AI art because although I find it like pretty interesting, which I guess is my version of Kevin's cope for looking at AI art, but like flipped.
I think that even though there has been some obvious shifting in the discourse, because there had to be, like, I really don't think that AR artists or the human artists as a community are ready for that next shift where, maybe AI just starts making music that's better than some human artists.
Yeah, I don't know that human society at large is like quite ready for widespread implementation of AI and many things.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much. There's so much low hanging fruit already. That's insane.
Yeah,
and like sometimes I feel like I'm living in this.
Crazy.
Yeah, like sometimes I feel like I'm living in this parallel reality where like I'm describing some AI thing, and I'm just like, isn't this insane? Like, isn't this crazy? And people are kind of just like, I don't know. And like sometimes I just feel insane. Like sometimes I'm just like, yeah, sometimes I just feel insane. Like I'm just like, well, why don't you care about? Not even why don't you care about like AI becoming the scary thing, but like, why don't you care about this really potentially harmful and corrosive AI ability that like already exists? Like one thing that really concerns me is the ability of AI girlfriends to have like corrosive effects on the human social fabric. And usually when I talk to people about it, they're kind of like,
I think the reaction is to kind of clown on that idea, but I do actually think that that's like a pretty real threat, like of just forming relationships with things that do not exist. Well,
and people's like people's responses to it are just kind of like, oh well, AI can't do this, or like, well, is that even like such a bad thing? Or like I just really feel like they haven't run through the implications of what this would mean at all, and just like not only that, but they're kind of unwilling to do so. And this kind of like head in the sand behavior about the implications of AI just really bothers me. Like I don't know why people aren't more panicked, I guess. Like I just think even if AI progress stopped right now, that prospect would still kind of scare me.
If you are like view a technology and you want to be underwhelmed by it, like you can be underwhelmed by it,
Yeah.
You can use AI in such a way so that it is underwhelming to you, if you just ask it questions that you could just Google, right? But like if you ask the AI, like, what color is your shirt, right? Like, it'll answer with something. And it's like, does that answer really even have meaning? Like, not really. It's not like the AI has a shirt, right? But it's definitely like a very different sort of thing than what you're going to get from just Googling the question.
I don't want to ask ChatGPT what color the shirt is.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure what the answer. It might just be like, it might say like, oh, I'm wearing like blue right now, blah, blah, blah. It might also just say like,
I am an AI.
As an AI, I do not have a physical body, so I do not wear clothes.
Do you have any thoughts on the implications of AI girlfriends on human relationships?
I think there's going to be a moment where it's pretty bad.
Like soon?
Yeah, like probably within the next 10 years. Certainly certainly like the next 15.
I'm actually more concerned about the second order effects of AI girlfriends. I don't really care quite as much about how it affects relationship dynamics. Although I do think that will be bad. What I think will be really bad is I think that honestly, relationships and just like, finding fulfilling friends and finding a partner are in large part what motivates people to just go outside and participate in society. And I think that if you didn't have that need anymore, I think you would get even more people just kind of like opting out of society totally. And the prospect of even more people doing that really kind of frightens me.
Something that's a bit heartening for me, I guess, is that, I don't know, if you bring up AI girlfriends to anyone, like pretty much no one's gonna like admit like, I'm gonna get an A. Well, okay, there's some people who are like hyped about the prospect or whatever. But generally people are like, okay, but like that wouldn't be me. That's pretty pathetic. And it's generally like viewed as pathetic by society. And like, and that kind of leads into like why isn't viewed as a big problem and stuff. And while I kind of agree that may be inaccurate, I also think it's good because I think that's like, the social stigma, I think, is sort of the best defense here,
Yeah, keep AI girlfriends low status.
Yeah. That being said, people did clown on like AirPods, and now like everybody has AirPods.
I'm not saying it's like unbreakable, but
Probably a better example is TikTok.
Yeah, probably a better example.
People hard clowned on TikTok.
People hard clowned on TikTok.
And I still don't have TikTok. Let's fucking go. Not getting the AI girlfriend. We take those.
I feel like now using TikTok is just a really kind of strange new media experience. Like you kind of there's something almost existential about it. It kind of feels like you're peering into the void of like the collective unconscious sometimes, and like there's just something like very, very infinite about it, and something that feels personal in a way that's sometimes comforting, but also like deeply disturbing. TikTok as a platform has taken on more art dimensions than any other platform that I've used.
I think you can like scroll through Instagram or like YouTuber stuff. Once these companies like realized that's what people did, they made that easier to do. TikTok was just like the target experience from the start. You were never meant to be on TikTok to just like watch a video. You were meant to just waste away 5 hours in a single sitting without knowing where the time went.
In a sense, TikToks are the first truly new media form. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but like I think that in terms of mainstream media consumption, I don't think that like a tweet, which is basically just text, or like a YouTube video, which is basically just a video, I don't think they felt qualitatively different as media in the same way that a TikTok does. I think that a TikTok is truly like this new media form that like was always possible with the internet, but like it took a while for something like that to actually become mainstream. I mean, can you guys think of anything that is maybe a counterexample to that?
Do you think it has more to do with like the platform that it's on? Because I feel like 15-second videos existed, and like Vine existed beforehand, but the method in which they're consumed is pretty different.
I think it's more like the form is like the scroll.
Yeah, that's okay. I see what you're saying.
It's sort of, I think it's actually just become more than video.
Like the infinite content.
Yeah, like more, in a way that like I think a tweet is, I think it's more of a spectrum. Like I think a tweet is like almost, maybe like 40% of the way to being like a new medium. But I think like TikTok has kind of gotten all the way there, or at least quite close.
Do you think that it feels like different from, like a social media feed before because of the like infiniteness of it.
That's a good point. I think maybe just infinite scroll. Maybe that's like a better analogy. But I don't think infinite scroll was really consumed as art in the same way that TikTok is.
Can you elaborate how you think TikTok is like consumed as art?
Well, I think that like, scrolling your feed was sort of not really seen as like a consume activity in that much of a way. Like you would scroll your feed to like see the things on your feed.
Is that not consuming media?
I think for like Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook or YouTube, I feel like scrolling the feed is more of a like a, I don't know, let's see what's new or whatever type of
Yeah,
thing.
like you're trying to
It kinda
find
has
posts
like
which are the real art. Whereas like if you're scrolling TikTok, you're mainly
Yeah.
going for the experience of scrolling TikTok. And I think some people used to go on social media for that purpose in the past, but it wasn't like mainstream like it is now.
Mhm.
Like
Okay.
you can just like scroll TikTok as like an activity without any regard to what the content actually is.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Well, I think this is a pretty good time to wrap things up. As a final note, Merrick, did you have any short fiction recommendations that you would like to make to the audience?
Well, since we were talking about Ted Chiang, I would recommend Tower of Babylon, which is from Story of Your Life and others, and The Beginning of Wool, which is a pretty good short story. Tower of Babylon is, well, it's a telling about the Tower of Babylon. I don't know how to sell it to you other than that. You should check it out.
you like making a bunch of different people working together and make a really big thing.
Really big thing.
Really big thing. And then The Beginning of Wool is
Other noted big thing short story.
other noted big thing, slightly different.
Oh yeah, so yeah, really similar vibes, huh?
Yeah.
They're like pretty similar, yeah. Oh yeah, I guess they are like pretty similar. I guess I didn't think about that too hard.
We love big, tall, narrow objects.
We love big, tall, narrow objects and the character going to the top of them.
Yeah. Or the bottom, right?
Oh,
Well,
not at the very beginning, but
no, the
or
top.
the short story at the start.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
some high quality recommendations.
yes. Well, two of my favorite short stories of all time. I would definitely second these, and I'd like to thank Merrick for coming onto the podcast. And
Thanks for having
we
me.
will see you all next week.